But this is a very unique situation we're in, and I think it's an opportunity, so to speak, in a situation where maybe there's some lemons being made out of lemonade in terms of just what we're seeing. You know, the world is changing, and just in a matter of weeks, you know, the reduction in pollution from airplanes and, you know, cars and et cetera, et cetera. And I know there's a few scientists on this call, so I'm just wondering, you know, who out there has their pulse on what's going on in the world in terms of studies that are being done, and just sort of how we're seizing on some of the opportunity that this is presenting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe Susan's the only scientist on this call. I'm not sure. You're muted.
You're muted.
Susan,
Yeah, my audio wasn't working. I'll try and type something which might be slightly more coherent than my last answer anyway. Mike, I think it's a great question, and we should definitely explore that. But when you the chat bar, you mentioned the dolphins in the canals in Italy coming up, and you know, Delhi, the sky is blue, which is amazing. So yeah, we are capable of change when we have to be, when we're in crisis mode.
Right.
And we are seeing what can happen. On the other hand, you know, this is having devastating effects because it was such a sudden shutdown on our economy. And so finding the balance between the two is going to be a challenge. Right now with COVID, it's you know, economy and health. With climate change, it's that versus, you know, it doesn't have to be versus economy, but certainly it's complicated. But we're finding out that there are a lot of things that we can do and changes that we can make. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but we can make them, and it does have an immediate impact. A couple of years ago, I saw this cool movie called Sonic Sea, and it was about the amount of noise pollution there is in the ocean. And it's particularly looking at whales and how they hear things. And there was this experiment done that was unintentional, but an experiment was done where all of the noise stopped for a while, and the stress levels that you could measure by the hormones in whale poop, because that's a thing, went way, way down after that natural experiment. That natural experiment was 9/11. And we learned a lot because we got thrown into this new situation. And I think we're right now in the middle of this unplanned natural experiment again. And you know, a lot of the situational data that's out there already in terms of, you know, all of those monitors that are out there for air pollution, for pollen counts, for all that other stuff that's measuring particulate matter, all of the satellites that are up there looking what's happening to, you know, the atmosphere, and you can see the change in the colors of the clouds, all of that stuff, that science is being done sort of, and magically right now. The analysis afterwards is going to be where you really get your teeth into it. And then as we turn things back on, you know, how quickly does that shift back? And all of that's the big giant question that we're going to be looking at for years.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, this demonstrates to people and that are paying attention, you know, to this type of stuff, that it really doesn't take sea change type stuff necessarily to make a huge difference, that every little bit that we can do can make a difference. And I think the more we can share these stories and talk about them in public forums and social media and all that stuff, it's just to raise awareness and say, hey, look, we can make a difference. This isn't an, you know, problem that can't be overcome, I think is a good thing. So thank you for your input on that, your reply.
Thanks, Mike. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, but is it Naisha? Yep. Do you want to ask the question yourself and unmute yourself here? Okay, the question Naisha's bringing to the fore here is, what is the next step to have this shown on various platforms and institutions? Which one of you three beautiful people want to? Christophe? Yep.
Yeah. So we got so excited when the film was finished, which was back in July, that we immediately put it on YouTube to share it as broadly as possible. But then we applied to film festivals, and we won about 6 prizes to date. But film festivals don't like their entries to be broadly available on YouTube, so we had to pull that off. But once we are done with applying, the idea is to share it as broadly as possible. No, we don't have anything to sell. The idea is to show that film. You know, that film was really created more for the skeptics and even the deniers than the people like most of us who feel that in our DNA. And we've seen that in action. You know, I've shown this film to people who are deniers, absolute deniers, and I've seen its emotional impact and how the film was able to open the door for a conversation to take place. And that is absolutely key. Is like whatever emotional vehicle we're going to use to be able to start a conversation. And that's the beginning, because all of us are going to do absolutely everything we can to minimize our carbon footprint, etc. I'm not preaching to the choir at all. But what's really important is two things. One, the deniers and the skeptics maybe get a chance to watch that film and think, you know what, maybe we should sit down and think about this a bit more. And secondly, children. So we've had many opportunities to show the film to the first generation, the first film, to children in schools. And it was really remarkable because, again, it's very accessible. It spoke to them. So kids would respond by, you know, I had no idea, and they had many questions, but they had an emotional reaction that was not traumatic, but that opened their minds. And then hopefully they went home, you know, that evening and started to talk about climate change with their parents. So again, the goal, the long-term goal, is for these to be broadly available. And then what we're hoping is that for some people to be able to share their own perspective on how climate change is affecting them in their communities. Now, I remember distinctly, maybe 2 years ago, we showed the film at Sustainable Seattle, and in the audience there were two ladies from East Africa. And at the end of the film, they said, wow, this is great, but no, it doesn't show at all the way we are being impacted in our community, which is very specific. So it would be nice to actually customize the film to reflect the many perspectives on how climate change is affecting communities worldwide. So the constant is the music. The music is not going to change, but what could vary is the film. We could have different images, we could have different footage. So in that respect, we're very flexible. So maybe there would be a way to have the music as a soundtrack and then add images from all over the world showing many different ways in which climate change is affecting people.
I'd like to follow up on that briefly. My friend Cheryl Sleen is on the call here, and Tyler and I are working on a platform called Ava's Wild Stories. That's the YouTube channel you were just on, that will feature stories just like this, stories that are devoted to revering and protecting the wild in ourselves and on our planet. And that's certainly one outlet that we would love to feature this, you know, and promote the heck out of it. I don't know if you guys can see the image that I threw into the chat bar or not, but it is of the recording itself of this. Are you able to open that JPEG up in the chat bar or not?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I'm wondering, Dave, I wanted to throw this one to you. What was it like going to Bastille? And can you set the stage a little for us and what it was like to actually see this thing recorded?
Well, that was my first time at the Bastille Chapel, and it is, in a word, gorgeous. It is just a spectacular, beautiful chapel that, according to those who record there, has spectacular acoustics. And so not only was the sound quality and the experience of seeing Christophe and the orchestra produce this beautiful music, but in that environment, it really had a kind of a spiritual element for me in terms of its impact. And I knew right away that once that they had compiled and edited the music down, that the piece itself was going to be spectacular. And certainly Christophe knows this better than I, but the company that recorded it is one of the top recording, or probably the top recording engineering firm in the Pacific Northwest. And David Saby has done literally hundreds of films and soundtracks and uses Bastille to do it. So the quality and the professional skill of the musicians was just spectacular. And under Christophe's direction, it was just a completely moving experience.
I couldn't agree more. I was there. I got the chance to actually film it, and I had tears in my eyes a lot and a lot of chills. It was really spectacular, everything about it. And I'd like to open it up to more questions. Does anybody have a question for our panel, or an observation, or something to share about, you know, this experience of experiencing art together here in this different kind of space we're in? Or we could do a dog show too. Impromptu.
So Mike just asked if I played in the orchestra. I played in the premier orchestra. I did not play in the professional orchestra. I do not have the chops to play with that group whatsoever. So no, I watched them in awe, because the recording session was one day, and so we were running around like chickens with our heads cut off because we hadn't printed parts. So we were using every printer on campus to print physical parts for all the musicians before they showed up, and distributing them like mad. And then they were there and the musicians were there, and they sat down, and Christophe ran through it once, and then they worked on spots, and we recorded it in one marathon 10-hour days. There were breaks all the way through. But no, I do not play well enough to do that at all. It was an amazing set of people, and my mom came into town for it, and that was cool. Hi, Mom. And so she wasn't there for all of it, and was only coming up for part of it. And I was there for all of it. And my husband Jeff was taking care of the 4 kids in the morning and making sure all of them got to school, because it was January. And he wound up coming up later, and he sat down next to me, and we were stuck in the choir loft in the back. And it was one of the nicest things he ever said to me, as he kind of scooched in real quiet and says, "So how does it feel to be the one who made this happen?" And until then, at the recording, I hadn't cried. And there are a few men who make me burst into tears on a regular basis, and Mark is one of them, and Christophe is one of them, and every once in a while Jeff hits that note too. So in good ways always, but that was kind of a profound moment for me to see all of that come together. And it was probably better that I wasn't playing, because I wouldn't have been able to enjoy it the same way.
Naisha's asking who decided what civilizations would be featured, and I think that's a great segue to give a shout out to our friend Tracy Detlefs, who is the editor on this piece, is a friend of ours, and is a documentary filmmaker in his own right. The project was brought to Tracy and his team, who's now living in exile in West Seattle, and they, as documentarians, had a large library of work to choose from, and I think that the work that he's done in the past really lent credence to that, and frankly was, you know, based on the notes that Christophe provided to really follow true to that. Would you say that would follow true to your vision, Christophe?
Yeah, I mean, I want to give a bit of background about the visuals. Because of course, as a composer, your goal is to write a piece that tells the story without needing any other dimension. That's essential. If the music was not able to do that by itself, then it wouldn't have a purpose. So it was very important for me that when I composed the piece, that the music would tell the story, period. But then there's something I wanted to do right away is to commission a poem. And we haven't talked about that because it's not featured in the film, and I can explain why. So I wanted a poem because I wanted the voice of a teenager to be heard. So I commissioned a 17-year-old young woman from Boston whose family I knew for years to write a poem about climate change. And she did. Her name is Emily Sif, and she wrote an extraordinary poem. And then she came for the premiere in June 2015, and she read the poem sitting right next to me while I was conducting the orchestra. And then when we had planned the premiere for that June date in 2015, I knew that we would be performing at Mini Hall at the University of Washington. And this is a venue that has a big screen available, a huge full-size movie screen. So I thought, wow, you know, having a screen available like this, it'd be a pity not to use it. And climate change can be very abstract. What if I projected a few images? So I went online and started to search for images. And before you know it, I had found 150 of them. And I created a montage of them using the famous Ken Burns device, you know, of panning through images to give them a sense of motion. And I created a film, and I make no pretense of being a documentary maker, but that initial film had quite a big impact as well. So when we did the premiere, we had the music, the poem, and the film. And then fast forward January 2019, I made revisions to the score. We re-recorded with a professional orchestra and ended up with that new soundtrack that was absolutely the best it could be. And then we thought, well, we need a new film. We need an actual film with moving images. And this is how we got in touch with Tracy, and they took over. So I didn't tell them what to do, really. I didn't. I essentially gave them the first version, the original film, as a guideline for the way the story unfolds, if you will. And then they took it and made it their own.
I'm going to ask one more question and then shut my mouth and let you guys do the rest. But during the, Christophe, you mentioned something while we were watching this evening, during the section where we're actually going over the Earth's surface, there's some staccato bursts of music. Can you explain? It's very powerful, and I was drawn to it, so was Tyler. Can you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, this was Susan's idea. This is SOS, and SOS in Morse code is 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. So I found a chord which convey a sense of urgency, and I assigned that to a huge brass section, trumpets, trombones, tubas, horns. And I had this statement at a critical point in the piece, and the statement appears in succession, and the interval between each occurrence is shorter and shorter to obviously convey a sense of urgency. And that proved to be one of the apexes, I would say, of the piece in trying to convey the sense that it is now. We need to do a lot more now. Time is running out. So this is the big SOS moment in the piece.
Well, it resonated. Any more questions for our artists and panelists? And Adam, I assume you're joining us from the East Coast. Are you, is that, let's see, it must be 10:45 or 9:45 over there, yeah?
It's a little bit later, but it was wonderful to spend some time watching this again, and really moving and mostly inspiring to hear all the, well, what you made happen, Susan, you know, by your kind of sheer determination and force of will and all the good that's going to come of it, how many people are going to be be reached by this, and we need so many different ways to reach people. Obviously, it was hard not to watch this and want to be in that chapel and have that experience. So hopefully that'll, there'll be some live venues in addition to the festivals and YouTube channel, and I'm sure whatever. But love to hear more about the educational plans. If you have more thoughts, what the aspirations are to get into schools and reach young people more with this, because that's still, the best way to affect change.
Thank you, Adam. You know that possibly my most defining characteristic is stubbornness, which I came by honestly. But I think Christophe can probably talk more about where we would like to have this go next. And schools is definitely on that slate. In one of the things he mentioned, the poem, and I'm going to toss this off to him, but one of the things I would love to see is different communities being able to write their own narratives. And so not only explore what's going on in each community right now and what's happening and the impacts that they're feeling, but also have them have a dialogue and talk about it. And the poem that was in the world premiere was in 3 chunks. And I think that gives you an interesting opportunity to have potentially more than one speaker, more than one perspective, past, present, future, however you would do it. But I think there are a lot of ways that kids could interact with that, and very, very interdisciplinary. I mean, it's such a complicated question that I think there are lots of ways to tie it to art, to music, to science, to language, to economics, to history, to lots of stuff. So I would love to see that. But Christophe, I will stop now.
Yeah, and we also are sending the piece to orchestras. So we're hoping that orchestras around the world will play it. No, it can be played by a community orchestra, because it was for the premiere, all the way to professional orchestras, and including university orchestras, high school orchestras. No, I have this vision of this, the Terra Nostra project being interdisciplinary idea, where science would contribute, and then poetry, and then even dance. You could dance to Terra Nostra, film, photography, and obviously music.
Some of us could dance. Some of us could not. I put it in the chat bar, but has there been anything with the footage that was shot from the actual live recording at this point?
Not yet.
Well, all right, we'll talk later.
Okay, so I told you, Mark, that if I could change one thing about the current version of this, it would be having the credits roll a lot more slowly, so that people could see them, because it's this amazing list of everybody who made this possible. And I had thought little spots of having some of the footage that you took be in there would be kind of fun. In the time frame that we were doing it, that did not happen. But I'm officially think that you should be in charge of the great documentary that is the making of Terra Nostra. So you've got all of it.
Totally. I'll pencil it in my spare time here.
Time, I know.
Yes. Well, let's see. We've got about 10 minutes left. Time for another couple questions. Are there any takers at this point? If there aren't any, I would like to just very briefly introduce my friend Amy Gulick, who is going to be our next presenter for our next Streamside chat next week. Amy's a dear friend and a fellow salmon nerd, and is an accomplished author. And Amy, you want to tell us a little bit about what we can expect next week?
Sure. I think I'll give you a visual. So this is my latest book. It's called The Salmon Way. And I'm a photographer and a writer. And the book takes a very deep dive into various relationships that Alaskans have with wild salmon. So, and I spent 5 years in the making of the book, and I spent time in Alaska Native villages, learning how Alaska Native people, for thousands of years, what their relationship is with salmon and how it's fed them and built their culture, and basically it is who they are. I spent time with commercial fishermen to see what that's like, and then spent time with sport fishermen, and then just spent time with kind of everyday Alaskans who, you know, go out on the weekends in the summer and fill their freezer with salmon for the winter. So very different relationships that people have with salmon, but there's this very common thread that runs among all of those relationships. And it's all brought out in the book in these various stories. And it was a 5-year project, but I could have spent the rest of my life working on it, because when you sit down with people and you say, hey, what does salmon mean to you? The conversations that you will get into are just, you know, mind-blowing. We end up crying. I mean, tears of joy usually for the most part, but just very, very deep, emotional, wonderful stories come out. And it's just really neat to see that there's somewhere left in the world, and Mark, you know this better than anybody, where people have this kind of not only relationship with a wild animal, but then how that translates into their life and what kind of life lessons they learn, and what parallels are going on in their own lives that are also going on in the salmon's lives. So I'll be sharing a lot of stories of all the people that I met with,
and hopefully some of those folks as well in the chat, which is fantastic. I can't wait. And you know, I think this, just tying this all together, you know, salmon being a keystone species, and until I really got on my salmon journey, I didn't understand what a keystone was, but it's the part in an arch that is the center stone that keeps everything together. And salmon are that. And I think, you know, in this time of this pause in the world, we're going to learn some pretty amazing things about ourselves and this planet. And it's going to be one of those pivotal moments of before and after. And I don't think there could be a better time for this piece of art that you guys created. I'm so inspired to be friends with you guys and a part of this in a small way, and couldn't be prouder to have you here tonight. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work with us. And for folks that want to check out the Wild trailer, I just posted the link there in the chat bar. And anybody else that wants to stay connected with the tour that we're putting together here, you can just shoot an email to us at connect@thewildfilm.com, and we'll put you on our newsletter and keep you up to date. Any final thoughts before we take off for the evening?
Yeah, this is Dave again. I just want to make one little pitch. Thank you, Mark, for hosting this. And in the chat bar, you'll find a link to be able to donate to Terra Nostra. If you've been moved by this piece of music, by this wonderful set of visuals, please consider becoming part of the Terra Nostra family. Click on that link and support it in any way you can. If you have interest beyond, in addition to financial support, please reach out to us as well, because we're always looking for other individuals to join and lock arms together to move this piece so it can become a global phenomenon, to raise people's awareness and to create action for climate change.
Amen. And I just reposted that at 6:54 in the chat bar there. Thank you all for being here. This is an unexpected delight to come together in this way. And COVID-19 be damned, I hope we can continue this moving forward. Appreciate it, and stay in touch, and good luck out there, and good night.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Good night.
Stay at home.
Stay healthy.